You know that moment when you first take a bite of truly delicious summer fruit just dripping with sugar and the voices in your head start calling out recipe ideas like, oh, what about a fruit cobbler? That sounds good. What about a fruit crisp? Ooh, that's a really good idea. What about cake with fruit in it? That is also a good idea, but I don't want to make all three. I want to take the best qualities from each of those recipes and make them into one. And that's what we're making today. Let's get started. The first thing I'm gonna do is make the topping for this incredible Frankenstein dessert. So what I wanna start with is a little bit of all-purpose flour. That'll go in. Then we want some dark brown sugar, which will hold on to some of that moisture, but it brings like this lovely molassesy flavor. And one of the flavors that goes well with molasses is a bit of cinnamon. And of course, you always wanna even out sugar with a little bit of salt. So those are the dry ingredients. With a food processor, I'll just pulse this a couple times until it's all fully kind of incorporated, okay? Okay, no big chunks, that's good. Now the next thing you wanna do is get really cold butter and then dice this up. This is 4 tablespoons, and each little tablespoon I've cut into 4 pieces. So we have, 16 pieces, little tiny cubes, okay? These little guys, like this, ice cold. And those go in. I'm gonna pulse this until it just starts to look like, it's like on the ocean and you walk along and the tide goes out, but it still holds a form. It's kind of like a wet, sandy looking thing. That's what we're looking for. Okay, see, it's sort of crumbly, but there's still some big chunks of butter in there, but some tiny pieces. That's what we're looking for. Now, I have oats. Don't you just love a crisp and a crumble that have the oats on top? Oats go in, right, for some flavor and texture, and a little bit of raw almonds. Now, I don't want to use toasted because when they finally go on top and I bake them, I don't want them to over bake, okay? So they'll bake on top, and I've already pre-chopped them because I found that it sort of incorporates more evenly that way. And we'll pulse this until it looks like sort of a crumbly sand, right? Okay, that is perfect. Do you see how it sort of went up against the side and the weight of it just went and collapsed upon itself? That's great. There's still some chunks in there. We have the nuts, we have the butter, but you don't want to be dangling around the kitchen. You want this to stay nice and cold. So I'll put this inside of a bowl and I will transfer this whole thing into the fridge so none of the butter melts. This goes in the fridge, then on to step 2. The next step of this recipe is making the cake batter. A really flavorful cake batter that's gonna hold up beautifully. Now, the food processor, I didn't even clean it out. Great thing as far as saving time, bonus without washing up, and then add a bit of all-purpose flour. Always a good start to any cake. We're also gonna add sugar. Now, sugar not just adds a certain amount of sweetness, but it also holds on to moisture. It's called hygroscopic. So any moisture in there, it's gonna hold it on and keep it moist. We also have baking powder for leavening. We want it to rise a little bit. We also have some ground cardamom. So good, not too much, but just enough. And then we also have salt, because salt's always nice to have to balance out the sugar. They all go in. These are all of our dry ingredients. Just like before with that crumble topping that's now in the fridge, pulse it all up until it's fully incorporated. Next up, flavor. Well, what kind of flavor? Well, fat is flavor and butter happens to have a lot of flavor. But unlike the crisp where it was cold butter, I've melted this butter and also added 1 tablespoon of neutral oil. This is grapeseed oil in here. I'm gonna stream this in so every little piece gets coated evenly. What you'll see is the moisture in the butter will start to pool together with the flour and looks kind of like almond flour or oat flour. So that's a great sign. A sign for what? Well, a sign to add a couple large eggs, 2 large eggs. And the purpose for eggs in this wonderful cake is it emulsifies the whole thing. So it brings all these ingredients and pulls them together so they don't separate. So you blend this up till it's beautifully mixed. So it starts to look like a really thick batter. So we're gonna thin that out, but also add a little bit of flavor. What kind of flavor? Well, I personally like ginger cake, a fair amount. 1 tablespoon of freshly grated ginger that goes in addition to orange zest from 1 medium orange, that's about 2 teaspoons. And I want to take a sip, but I'm not going to. I'll put it in the cake. Amaretto. It goes wonderfully because we added almonds to that crisp topping. So we're doubling down on that almond flavor. And milk, whole milk. Don't go for the 2% or skim stuff. You want that extra fat in there. It's actually only 1%. Skim milk is nothing. 1% is 1%. 2% is 2%. 3% is whole milk. It's not a big deal, so use the whole milk. And I'll process this for about 10 seconds. Scrape the whole thing down and process it for 10 more seconds. Batter is done. The topping is done. Now the only thing we're missing is that fresh fruit. This fresh summer fruit is just jonesing for my attention. But before I mix these ingredients together, there's one thing that's very important to do. Oven is preheated at 350. This pan is covered with little diced cubes of butter. And the reason I did this is because it's going to go on a sheet pan in the oven, and it's going to melt and get hot at the same time. It'll be in there for probably 8-10 minutes. You'll definitely want to check it. You don't want it to brown necessarily or scorch. You just want it to be melted and really hot. And then we'll come back and finish up this fruit. The pan is in the oven. It's getting really hot and the butter is melting beautifully. Now, the reason why I wanted to do that first instead of mixing these ingredients and then doing that is because as soon as you add sugar to fresh fruit, it starts pulling out moisture and gets a little gloppy. I want all the flavor and liquid to remain in that fruit. I have sugar, I also have cornstarch, and I have a little bit of salt. Again, just to make sure it's all balanced nicely. Mix this all together. And the reason for that is because otherwise the cornstarch will just go and just stick to the first thing it touches. By mixing it with the salt and the sugar, it distributes a little more evenly. I'll shape this at the top. Try to get all the pieces evenly coated. Best fruit I have going on right now are blackberries and also some dark plums. If you have pluots or red plums, that would work. And also if you happen to have raspberries that are really good, that would work as well. This is all mixed up. Now time is of the essence. I hope you guys are warmed up and stretched and ready to get going because it is game time. It's hot. That is a good thing. Now it is time to put the whole dessert together. I'm gonna hold the bottom with my finger in this hole so it doesn't fall out and just pour this right over top of that melted butter. Now what happens is that melted butter and that hot pan and the sheet pan that's hot underneath it as well, it's gonna make it start to cook, and it gives that cake, the outer cake portion, a beautiful brown color. And where there's brown, that is the caramelization happening. You can actually see some of the butter sort of coming around the sides as well. What I want to do is crush these sides of the perimeter with some of this fresh fruit. And if I didn't do the sides or the corners first, it would start to actually souffle. The sides would come up really fast, and I want to punch them down just for the beginning. Magic will still happen, I guarantee. And then just evenly distribute the rest of the fruit. Now, if you find that you have some liquid in the bottom, don't add it. I know you want to, there is some flavor in there, but any extra moisture coming off of it will actually tend to make this cake a little on the soggy side. We don't want that. We want perfectly cooked slices of cake, every single slice. That looks good. All right, last thing, that crumble, brown sugar, oats, and it's cold, which is good because it's easier to handle. Put it over evenly, just sprinkle it right over. I'll do the same thing, do those corners first, along the perimeter. If you want to have a tendency to sort of break down these big chunky pieces, don't. Those big chunky pieces are where all the magic is. But it bakes up, and you're like, I just love these big chunkers along with some of this sweet tart fruit, the cinnamon, the cardamom, that ginger and orange zest. makes a song, a harmony so beautiful you can barely stand it. This is ready to go back in the oven. 45 minutes total. We'll rotate it after 20 minutes and out will come the song of the cherubs. Here we go. With any baked good, it's very difficult not to just want to dive right in. But you want to let this cool for at least 45 minutes because as you've noticed, it soufflés up and as it cools, it starts to calm back down. That calming period allows it to continue cooking throughout the entire cake in the middle. We want that for the finished texture. It's been 45 minutes right on the dot, so now it's time for me to show you the inside as far as what's happening here. This outer portion, it's a little bit crispy, which is always nice. This top portion cuts beautifully. And it's just this gorgeous line of oats and brown sugar and almonds sort of snake their way through this whole thing. Now, it's a little scoopy, and that's okay, because it's not just a cake, and it's not just a crumble, and it's not just, oh, it is one thing, and it is just amazing. Bring it over to the plate. First impression, and it hits me, is the almond. And it's probably from the fresh almonds, but also that amaretto. And it smells also a little bit of orange, and that's the orange zest. It's almost custardy in the middle portion, which is a wonderful juxtaposition of that firm cake outer layer. And as you saw, the cake kind of soufflés up and then covers the topping. So you've got this layering effect. A+, guys. I think you should totally make this recipe to really showcase summer's delicious fresh fruit. And if anybody tells you you cannot have your cake and eat it too, you tell them no. Not only can I have my cake, but I can also have my crisp and my cobbler and eat it too. In fact, have seconds.